Namaste and welcome. I wanted to talk about and touch on this concept or this comparison between what has become yoga in the West and what it actually was when, or what it was traditionally, I should say. So sort of the authentic way to teach and learn versus how it's become very Westernized and corporate and some of the differences. This is not to suggest, of course, that what is going on in the West with yoga is a bad thing or to judge it in any way. In fact, it has really raised the level of awareness of yoga considerably. However, it is taught very narrow in scope. It is incredibly focused on the physical practice and the poses and the effects of those poses in the musculoskeletal system. And it's very limited to that. And when in reality, the practice of yoga is a way of life and individual tools that can be used not only as a way of life, but as a way of conscious evolution. And Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutras, in the very second sutra, Yogaha Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is yoga is there to calm the will of the mind, which suggests that it is mostly a mental practice. So when we look at really the contrast in the physical practices largely taught in the West, targeted at the musculoskeletal system, largely targeted as a healthier body and a workout, all of which is very good for the physical body, we're really only looking at the tip of the iceberg. And I realized that after I took my first teacher training, that there was much more to this. You go online and look at Google and just see that there's much more to it, but it's so fragmented, and really I found it always difficult in trying to tie it together. How is this all integrated into one place? And I was able to resolve that through going to the source. And for me, that was traveling to India and living in an ashram for 6 months under the guidance of my guru and really learning the way it used to be taught, which is you go to the teacher and the information of the lineage is passed down from guru to chela, teacher to student. And those techniques were largely not codified. They were not written down. They were just passed down word of mouth. And a lot of what I was taught was just that. It's not written down anywhere. And what we were taught is this extended and beautiful system and science of yoga that integrated the entire body. So in fact, we rarely talked about the musculoskeletal system benefits. I think we spent half an hour on it. What we talked about from asana, what we talked about was how asana improved the circulatory functions and the respiratory functions and the digestive functions and the endocrine system functions and the nervous system functions and all of those other systems that optimize how the body performs. And when we look at the self as beyond just the musculoskeletal system and all those integrated functions, we begin to see how it all fits together. And then when we go beyond the asana, we start to tie in pranayama, which is energy control, generally through the breath and the respiratory system. And we see how that ties into the subconscious, and we see how that ties into the detoxification of the mind, the body, and the nervous system. And we see how that pranayama then becomes integrated with asana, and they're all related. And then we go a step further, and we look at pratyahara, which is our sensory control. And then we see how the senses affect our perception, and how the senses are tied to our nervous system, and how then the nervous system can trigger adverse responses in the respiratory system. And we start to see how if we control our senses, we control our perception. And it just becomes this amazing integration. And then we move a step further into the mind, and we move into how we can focus the mind. And I used to say, and I still do sometimes, I used to say that, God, if I could just get the committee in my mind to shut up for 5 minutes, literally. And that's the Chittavrita, that's the whirlpools in the mind. I always explain it when I'm teaching, like, and this dates me a little bit, but at the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, where they bring the crate with the Ark in it into the warehouse, and it's just this endless sea of boxes that look exactly the same, and I think to myself, geez, that's my subconscious. And it's always going and finding a box and shoving it up into my conscious mind, and I never know what it is until it puts it up there. It's just this randomized mess. So what we do is we then start practicing dharana, which is that we take the mind and we focus it into a single point. And then all of a sudden that single point becomes a point of absorption, and we realize that we're in a state of meditation, dhyana. And we can even go beyond that to where we become one with what we concentrate, and we are in samadhi. And all of those limbs of yoga that I just described are tied together. They're taught in a linear fashion, but really we're always in some state of some or all of them as we practice. And what we teach here at Ripple Yoga, and what I like to teach, is how that integration occurs and how we become consciously aware of that integration. And then on top of all that are the first two limbs, which are hardly ever mentioned in Western yoga, and that is yama niyama. Yama is the moral restraints, niyama the ethical observances. One restrains the animal part of the brain, the other accentuates the more human part of the brain. And these are such beautiful things, because when we actively practice yama niyama, we support or lay the foundation for the rest of our practices. Because the rest of our practices, as has been said, and I love this, that the rest of our practices make us better at who we are. But if we're missing that foundation, then we run the risk of becoming better at who we are by accentuating parts of ourselves that we may not want to keep. So it's just a beautiful science to where we can look at everything in this integrated fashion, tie it all together, and then we start to get this whole new perception of the self, which we can then shine upon the world. Because we must always remember that we are a reflection of the self at all times. So when we compare where we are in Western yoga, and we take a look at what we're teaching in Ripple yoga, we can begin to see that we can practice the Westernized yoga and work in the musculoskeletal system, and it's very good for our body, and we feel good. But if we want to see the whole of yoga, and we want to start to understand why we are doing what we're doing, then we must go beyond. And that is why I carry this message, why we built this platform to be able to share the entire integration of what yoga really is and how it was taught. And we're blessed in that we have technologies these days, because it's not likely that there's a lot of people that are available to stop their lives for 6 months and go travel to southern India, where I went and sit in an ashram for 6 months studying this. It's not particularly an ideal situation for today's lifestyle. I was very blessed and fortunate to be able to do that. But we now have technology available where we can, with this platform, carry this message, share this message, and allow anybody who wants to, through their technology, to be able to get not only an understanding of this, and I'm calling it the learn and practice method, if you will, because we learn about what we're doing, then we practice it, But even beyond that, then we experience it and it becomes a part of who we are. And we start to understand how we as human beings are living an integrated life experience. The only thing missing is opening our eyes to